Right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our second webinar of the summer term. First of all, could I ask everyone please to be on mute and turn your cameras off, please, so that we can all hear properly and follow well. Thank you very much. So we welcome Helen Lawrenson and Robin Wallis, who are going to talk about Spanish studies in the post-COVID era. Helen Lawrenson was formerly Director of Undergraduate Studies in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese at the University of Leeds, publishing on La Generación del 27 and Contemporary Spanish Cinema. Currently, Helen is Head of Modern Languages at University College School in Hampstead. And Robin studied Spanish at Cambridge and International Relations at the London School of Economics. After a stint in the diplomatic service, he became head of Spanish at Comfort and then Down House. And he has been a principal examiner for pre-U Spanish since 2010. He co-founded and edits the Bulletin of Advanced Spanish, which I hope you have all seen tweeted this week in our Twitter account. So thank you, Helen and Robin, for being with us today. And from ISMLA, we also want to extend our thanks to Sanaco, who are sponsoring this webinar. And without further ado, I hand over to Helen and Robin. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Marta. So first of all, obviously, from Robin and from myself, we just like to thank you very much, Marta and Kevin, for inviting us to take part in this webinar. And also to all of you for attending, because I think that it is certainly above the call of duty, given this summer term that I'm sure you've all had with the CAGs and all of the stress of the past year with COVID and the remote teaching. So we might be on our last legs, but it's wonderful to see you all here. Really what we're going to do with this talk is it's quite an informal talk, so please add any questions you might have, any queries to the chat function, and hopefully at the end we will address any questions that you might have that's due to either Robin or to myself. So basically what we're going to look at is we're going to look at this a current state of the union as regards Spanish teaching initially, and I'll have a look at the current sort of broad state of affairs as regards Spanish, particularly at A level. And then Robin is going to introduce a fantastic resource and a fantastic journal which he founded, which is called the Bulletin of Advanced Spanish. And also talk to you about a University College London research programme which involves universities and schools as regards how might the two institutions work together in order to promote Spanish further and embed it within the secondary curriculum. So that's Robin's side of things. So I'm just going to share my screen with you, as you can see here. So what we have here then is we have obviously the focus of today's webinar, and that is really language learning in Spanish, recruitment and retention at A level, and some strategies. So the first thing I really need to say is that the topic of Spanish in the post-COVID era is not particularly revolutionary, unfortunately, because it's basically a continuation of a language-wide focus over the last few years. So if we have a look here, we can just see some headlines which are taken really from the past 18 months or so. And, you know, really these headlines sum up the current state of affairs with modern languages in general. So if you just have a quick look here, you know, we all know about this. If we are regular ISMLA delegates, if you read the press, you know, we know about the issues regarding, you know, the severity of marking at A level. You know, some recent newspaper articles have focused on the fact that, you know, languages really mustn't become, you know, the preserve of the rich, i.e. the preserve of the independent sector. You know, the regulator responds to students being put off foreign languages because of this severity. We've then got an increasingly complicated situation and I'll talk about this in a second. And this is very much is dealt with in the British Council Languages for the Future document of 2017. But the whole situation is complicated even further now. So we're not just post-Brexit, but we're also post-COVID, which was something which appeared out of the blue, as it were, which has also had a huge impact on numbers and on uptake across all languages at this juncture. So we'll talk about that in a moment. So I think that whilst obviously in this webinar, the title and the focus is Spanish, I think it's really important, and I find this very often in my role as head of modern languages, and in my department we teach 5 languages. I'm really keen as well that whilst obviously Spanish is separate from the other languages, they really must be seen as all in the same boat, because I think that all of the languages are facing the same issues and problems, and we all have these obstacles to confront as regards the provision of time, the provision, what is happening in the curriculum, the cross-curricular possibilities that we have. So I'd like to quote a beautiful Persian poet, actually, just because I think this really sums it up. And the poet is called Saadi. And what he says, and this is actually inscribed on the United Nations building in New York. And it says, human beings are members of a whole in creation of one essence and soul. If one member is afflicted with pain, other members uneasy will remain. And I think that, that's really the attitude we should be taking. And I think also that we really need to be inspired by what STEM has done and by what STEM has achieved. And I think that really, rather than function as separate entities of languages, sort of battling for the same, and competing for the same group of students, I think it would be really fantastic if we can rally our forces, as a collective in the way that STEAM has done. So I think that's something strategically that we should all consider as we move forward in these very, very difficult times that we're facing. Okay, so back to the Spanish, because I know that that's why you're all here. So as regards the Spanish, I think that one thing we can reflect on is we can reflect on the fact that in the matrix of language indicators and scores, Spanish is consistently at the top as regards the economic, the geopolitical, the cultural, and the educational indicators. So it very often, and it depends which report you read, so you might read the British Academy's Born Global report, or you might, like I said, look at the British Council's Languages for the Future of 2017. Spanish is always at the top. So Spanish is always perceived to be, one of the most, I think, culturally attractive languages. So I think, whilst in the past we haven't necessarily had the same type of problems as regards pupil recruitment and retention as, let's say, German or Italian, which can be perceived as rather more niche. I think that currently, the current situation, and I can refer to my own department in that, we've seen numbers plummet this year. So when the A-level numbers came in, we've gone really from having 50 pupils across year 12 and year 13 to currently it's looking around 12 for year 12 in September. So there's definitely something has happened, and this has also been reported at Eton Group. So something is happening that I think we need to react to as a collective. So because Spanish is popular, and because obviously, we have a plethora of countries and a plethora of cultures that speak Spanish, we can cast a broader net as regards our cultural input, as regards parental, and let's face it, a lot of this is very often parental, a parental perception of, which is perceived to be the most useful language. So I think, we have that on our side to a certain degree. But I think that we still do need to, like I said, gather our forces together. So I think something that maybe we lose sight of in the day-to-day sort of, nitty-gritty of teaching lessons is to look at empirical evidence, to look at what the British Council report says, to try and reshape, recenter, reboot the syllabus. We're going to talk a bit later on about the curriculum and how languages might be repositioned within the curriculum. But I'm also pretty aware that, within the curriculum, I'm just showing you some data here from the British Academy. So you've got I'm sure you're all very familiar with these documents. And we have here the Languages for the Future, where Spanish retains its position at the top. But a lot of this is curriculum driven, and to a certain degree is out of the hands of the individual languages departments or the Department of Modern Languages, because these are whole school decisions that have to be made about how we really embed these cross-curricular possibilities. So, the scores, let's say on the British Council document that we have in front of us, the scores which are most interesting, which, like I said, make for really fascinating reading. Spanish scores the most highly in one indicator, which is the language needs of UK business, which is very interesting because that's the potential of Latin America, what used to be called the BRIC countries. Then we also have the second indicator where it scores most highly is the public's language interests. So again, that's what I was talking about, this sort of inbuilt attraction towards Spanish. So to a certain degree, that part of it is covered. And then also the other indicator, which is works in the favor of Spanish, is levels of proficiency of English in those countries. So again, we have this need for excellent Spanish linguists and Hispanists to be, we need to produce them. Now, obviously, the departure from the EU, which has had fairly catastrophic consequences, but it also necessitates bilateral international relations. So what we have is we need competent and we need proficient linguists who are well versed in transactional and communicative competences. So that's like stating the obvious, but I think the big issue that we've got here is how is that transferred to the curriculum? How is that transferred to pupil perception? How is that transferred to us positioning languages and Spanish, obviously, almost as a bolt-on skill to whichever other discipline pupils might be veering towards. So, for example, with medicine, with science, even with history and other humanities subjects, how can we encourage the fourth A level potentially, or even a third A level, dependent on what your school demands? How can we encourage that to be a language, which then represents a skill? So two of the British Council 2017 report recommendations read, and I quote, "Now is the moment to initiate a bold new policy in 2017." And 2017, unbelievably to me, is already 4 years ago. Seems like yesterday. So I quote, "Now is the moment to initiate a bold new policy to improve foreign language learning for a transformed global Britain." Okay, so those are really big, powerful words. But again, what we have to see is we have to see that transference. We have to see how that is happening. And this is, I think, what made Oliver Hopwood's webinar recently, when he looked in detail and drilled into the new proposals for the GCSE. I mean, I think that was why the majority of stakeholders in languages were rendered completely despondent by those findings. They were going to take the culture out. They were going to bring back seemingly archaic practices such as reading aloud in the foreign language. So there seems to be a bit of a conflict really between that proposal and the suggestions that have been made by this report, let's say Languages for the Future, and also any common sense that as language teaching professionals we have. I think, again, we need to look at STEM. I think we need to, I don't know, I'm at a loss really as to how to do this. But I do think that, again, like I said, the reframing on the reboot needs to be at curriculum whole school level, and how we affect that is uncertain to me, but it seems to me more and more of the essence that is done sooner rather than later. Now, obviously, the current talk is really very much part of an ongoing continuum, you know, and over the past 3 years, you know, when I looked back at ISMLA conferences and webinars, you know, eminent linguists and ISMLA members such as Professor Catherine Cole, Oliver Hopwood, Anna Hemsworth, they have all shone a light on this idea of the reimagining of modern languages and provided excellent strategies and data collation. But I think the issue, like I said, at hand is really an urgent and systemic need for change as to how we approach the teaching of languages in the United Kingdom. Now, the STEM has been a bulldozer. Now, it's wonderful, and it's worked wonders for science, technology, engineering, and maths has very cleverly bolted itself onto that. And you know, I think that I think we need to be inspired by STEM. And you know, John Clawton and Stephen Griffiths, ISMLA members, also, you know, have tried to divest language teachers of this idea of, you know, French in one corner, Spanish in another corner, you know, and this increasingly small corner of, you know, rivalry and fighting for the same patch of timetable and territory and the same pupils. If we just have a look now, this is another, there were 3 very big big reports that came out between 2016 to 2018. And the third one that I'd like to refer you to, and then I'm going to hand over to Robin, is a very interesting report by the Instituto Cervantes, which was published in 2018 or 2017, 2018, and it was called El Español, una lengua viva. And it really gave us a pathway as to the future of Spanish on the global stage. In the Bulletin of Advanced Spanish, which you're going to hear a lot more about in a second with Robin, when Robin introduces it, in 2018, the director of the Instituto Cervantes in London, Ignacio Peiró, wrote a wonderful article which really explored the pathway of Spanish language teaching in the United Kingdom. So he removed it from that global stage and just focused on the future, really, for Spanish language teaching in the United Kingdom. And I've got some quotes there which I think are fantastic. El español en el Reino Unido no es una moda, está para quedarse. Fenomenal, muy bien, me alegro mucho. El carácter crucial del español. And then he obviously analyzes the indicators, some of which I've looked at before. El turismo, una actividad comercial, empresarial. And then this is quite interesting. He flags this. La percepción de sencillez frente a otras lenguas modernas y su crecimiento en los Estados Unidos. So I think that by analysing empirical data and reading reports such as this, I think there's a huge amount of potential for us to be reframing the way we teach languages. You know, so for example, obviously this perception of Spanish is a bit easier. We tend to have a lot of that with Spanish is easier than French for, you know, the writing reasons, for the pronunciation reasons, etc. But also I think, you know, the way in which we frame it as being a very important global language, you know, the current predictions, as I'm sure Robin will tell you, for the growth of Spanish in the United States by 2050 are impresionantes. I'm super impresionantes. So, okay, now I'm going to hand you over to Robin now, if that's all right, because Robin is going to introduce this, and I will put this on the screen for the bulletin in 1 second. Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Helen. A nice chance to be able to speak to readers and potential readers of the bulletin. If you're not familiar with it, It's been coming out 3 or 4 times a year for the last 4 years, and it's a free resource. We sort of gather our articles and put them all out at the same time as though it were a traditional magazine, but it is in fact an online resource, and the latest one has just come out at the beginning of June. It's really born initially of the perception that teachers who were attempting the Cambridge Pre-U were not getting as much support from headquarters as they were hoping for. The Pre-U was in some ways quite an ambitious qualification to be teaching, and those of us who were meeting teachers who were involved in delivering it became aware that there was more that could be done, particularly, for example, in allowing teachers to become familiar with new texts and films that were coming onto the syllabus, and suggesting ways that those might be taught. So that was one reason for it coming on, giving a sort of an examiner's eye view on the syllabus that wasn't coming through the normal sort of teacher training or briefing sessions. But also there was a more philosophical approach, which overlaps to a considerable degree with the sort of cross-curricular ideas that Helen's been talking about in her presentation, and sort of tuned into the idea of delivering sixth form Spanish with a sort of soap opera factor. I found that was a good way to engage student interest. We were lucky with Spanish. We had so many different countries, and there were a lot of colourful figures that we could talk about with the students in class. I'm looking back about 10 years, but you'd be looking at whatever King Juan Carlos or Almodóvar or Sabina and Serrat or the Castro brothers or Hugo Chavez or Shakira, to name but half a dozen. Whatever they were up to, the stuff that was recurrent in the news, it could engage the student interest and make the whole 2-year experience of sixth form Spanish, following what these people were up to, could make that more come to life and become something that they got into following. And so I suppose to some extent that's one of the things the Bulletin tries to do now. We're aware that teachers are busy people and they don't always have time to follow developments across the whole Spanish-speaking world. And therefore, if we can use our resources to summarize tendencies, whether it be on issues like tourism, migration, COVID or post-COVID, as we see on the screen now, then that was a contribution we could be making. And there's also on a sort of wider philosophical point, if you're going to take the trouble to learn a language, then my feeling has always been that you need to have something worth saying once you've acquired that language. So if you learn Spanish and you go off to Chile and you're completely unaware of the very sharp political divisions that there have been in Chile over the last 40 years, then it's going to be harder to engage with local people in talking about their lives, and you'll get less out of the visit. And you could say that of all the Spanish-speaking countries. So equipping those who've learnt Spanish with some sort of degree of cultural, political, social background, and there's a lot of enjoyment to be had, I found, with students who perhaps initially thought, crikey, why we've signed up for Spanish, why are we learning about the history of Latin America or 20th century history of Spain? Well, actually, it becomes to be part of the bigger cultural picture. And that's something, I guess, that we promote through the type of articles we have in the Bulletin. And you can see there the menu at the top of the latest edition. Rebranding Languages is Helen's excellent article summarizing a lot of what she has just been saying. But you could see there's issues on Spain post-pandemic, Marruecos Ceuta, the immigration crisis, Brexit, first we've had a go at Brexit, Chile, the fascinating stuff that's going on with the Chilean rewriting their constitution, and so on and so on. This particular edition actually has rather less, it's the first edition we've ever had, I think, without specific stuff on film, But if you want to, it does have a couple of literary items. But if you want to look back at the kind of cultural content we've had hitherto, then if Helen could kindly scroll back up a little bit there, you'll see there's a past editions tab, which gives you access to two sorts of index. You get the index by title of article that covers each individual year of the bulletin's publication. And if you want to get more finicky, there's an index by content, which is a more traditional type of index, and again by year. And then underneath those two, you get the archived editions of each of the 12 previous volumes of the bulletin to have been published. So, depending on what your subject you're teaching, hopefully, what topics you're teaching, hopefully you can find something useful. Let's just take that example on the screen right now. If you're teaching Como agua para chocolate, then you'll find an article by the author of the critical guide, and indeed a chance to download the critical guide itself from that from that page, and a little something on Almodovar, and something on Cerati Sabina, which is also on the pre-U curriculum. So you can see the kind of idea behind the bulletin and the way we've tried to set it out, and hope that's useful. The level of content, well, Helen was showing us a moment ago the latest edition's article on Chile, which is in Spanish. We've always had some Spanish, some English language articles, and we flag up on the homepage when our current practice is to flag up on the homepage when articles are in Spanish. About 3 of those ones on the current edition are. But the idea of the bulletin is to make sure that this content is accessible. We do have 1 or 2 quite high-level writers like Stephen Hart, professor at UCL, Clara Riveros, a Colombian journalist, who put footnotes in and so on. But we want this to be accessible to students both at sixth form and undergraduate level, and their teachers. And therefore, when I'm writing on Chronica in the latest edition, I try to wrap it up in a fairly sort of user-friendly manner with top 10 takeaways and so on, which is deliberately contrasting with the more classic academic approach that Steve Hart takes in his critical guide on Chronica. If you can scroll down a bit, Helen, you'll see that we get into sort of 1 to 10 down there, little bite-sized analysis of the different themes. And I'd say that's fairly typical of how we're trying to make this accessible. There's also, we've also published quite a lot of works by both undergraduates and sixth formers. I don't mean works, I mean articles, over the 4 years. And in this edition, we have an item on an Argentine poet called Pizarnik, written by a year 12 sixth former. And that's one of the things we sort of take pride in with the bulletin, is that it's open to everyone who is an enthusiast for the subject. It doesn't matter if they're a university professor or a year 12 student, they will get published alongside each other. We are obviously keen to help anyone in the position of Catherine here, the year 12 student who wrote this, by giving advice on editing, and the guidelines tab on our menu bar is something that's worth a look at if you have a student who you think might like to send something in and perhaps get a little feather in their CV by getting published in the bulletin. This gives a little bit of an introductory clue as to how they might like to go about that. So if you are receiving the email alerts for each new bulletin already, that's great. If not, you can just go to the Bulletin of Advanced Spanish site, click on the Contact Us button, and send us your an email, and we'll make sure you get on the distribution list. There's actually also a subscribe button at the foot of the homepage as well. So it's there for you and to be shared with others who you think might have an interest. Do pass the word round. We've ended up getting read in quite a large swathe of the world. We got if you go to the homepage, Helen, and drop down to the bottom, there's a map of the world from the February edition, and we do have readers in all those countries, which is not quite sure how we've achieved that, but any British person, I suppose, gets weak at the knee when they see the map painted pink. But that is our own particular version of the map painted pink, so we are getting read on 6 continents, so that makes us feel it's all worthwhile. I'm sure that it's our readers passing on the link to other people that's led to that being possible. So please continue to spread the word. Now I need to just talk to you about the survey, which is there in the menu bar. And this is what Helen was referring to. It's the initiative for this has come from Stephen Hart at UCL. And he explains in this article what the purpose of this survey is. If you go down to the bottom of the article, you'll find the link that links you to the appropriate version of the survey that Stephen and his team have prepared. And you get to fill in your survey there through those links that are now on the screen. And the result of that, it's to be done by 1st of July. The result of that will appear in the next bulletin, but they will also be sent on to the exam boards and will help to define the next stage of this project that UCL is driving, which is going to workshops to discuss this feedback further, to help shape or reshape the A-level curriculum in the future. So that is the next stage that will be happening in the autumn. So it's an exciting project for the Bulletin to be involved with. The Instituto of Cervantes is also going to be working on this alongside UCL and ourselves. So, and this is a survey that is not just for Spanish teachers, it's intended for modern foreign language teachers across the board. So please do share that with your colleagues as you see fit. So we've had a gallop through the bulletin. Helen, do I hand back to you at this point, or are we?
Yes, thank you very much, Robin. If you think you've exhausted those 2 particular avenues very thoroughly, thank you very much. I hope that you know, you've all had a chance to have a look at just how visually accessible the bulletin is. You know, it's very often I might, you know, I log on and I'm looking for something in particular, and I find myself an hour and a half later because I just reading everything that I find, because it's written in such a lovely, concise way, which is not, you know, which is not overly dense or academic in style. It's super accessible, not just for us, but also for you know, for us as teachers, as for resources, but also I think for our pupils. You know, and as Robin said, you know, I think the facility there for our Year 12 and Year 13 pupils to submit articles to the bulletin is absolutely wonderful. It's the type of, you know, the type of practice that I think we really need to encourage amongst our cohorts. There was one thing, and maybe Robin might correct me if I'm slightly wrong on this, but I think one other interesting part of the UCL research project is also the provision of workshops for teachers. Am I right on that, Robin? Yes?
Yes, that's part of the autumn plan, but could I just interject one thing, which yes. I'm reminded of by the screen that you've kept up there. I said, please share the survey with your colleagues, but actually, please share it with your students as well, because you can see that a very important part of the survey is to see how the students are finding the current A-level curriculum and their response to it, and in a time of COVID and Brexit. So please share it not just with your colleagues, but with your students. Yes, but indeed, workshops will be are part of the process of this 1 year's study. Yeah,
and I think this is a fairly important point, because I think that you know, due to changes in undergraduate provision, in the past, in the old days, it used to be that when you studied for a degree in languages, in French, in Spanish, in German, it was always in the British university system, it was always extremely heavily weighted towards literature. But times have hugely changed and evolved, and I think that we can learn quite a lot from our colleagues in higher education, because I think the predominance of film in undergraduate modules is really of interest to us. I also think the way in which in undergraduate modules they academics group media thematically. So for example, I remember at Leeds, when I taught at Leeds, we had a first year course which was the sacred and the profane in Spanish cultural production. And I think that potentially is also the way ahead. So I know that on my blurb, I mentioned what I call burbujas culturales. And so maybe I should explain a little bit about that. I'll just switch back to the other screen. Bear with me. I'm not awfully good at this. Bear with me. Hang on. Let me
Helen, it's Kevin here. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
While you're looking for your new screen,
yes,
it might be an idea, if we could, to put the link for the surveys in the chat, because then colleagues could share them. Is that possible?
for me to do. Let me.
Or just anyone, if we have access to the survey links.
I'll see what I can do.
Thanks,
Okay.
Robin. Thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt you there, Helen.
No problem. Okay, bear with me. So let me just, that's it. Okay, sorry, bear with me. Okay. So
I'm coming again. Antonio's just done it. One of our colleagues
brilliant.
has done it. So thank you, Antonio. You're a star. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah, that's super important. Thank you, Antonio. That's brilliant. Okay, so talking about these burbujas culturales, really. So I'm just going to mention a few things from Ignacio Peiro's report, which was published in the Bulletin. He mentions la seducción del español. Los hispanohablantes rara vez somos conscientes del poder y la seducción de nuestra lengua, valores positivos, comunidad, futuro, alegría de vivir. And then I think this is also quite important, a key quotation from that report of Ignacio's. Es muy importante capitalizar lo que se ha dado en llamar latino. And I think this is quite key to the ideas that we have as regards Spanish teaching. So we're going to switch now, if you don't mind, before I move on to the burbujas culturales, just to get a sort of feeling for how your recruitment is looking. So I think in the chat, you've got the menti.com code. So it might be quite good if we can just find out, when do you start teaching Spanish? Because I think these are all fundamental things as well as regards how we manage to really promote and retain great Hispanic linguists. So I'm not sure if you can all access that. Would that be okay?
I have just, Helen, pasted that into the chat.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So, for example, in my school in UCS, we don't start until year 9, which I think has a certain knock-on effect, because we don't have timetable, we don't have enough time in order to really sell the cultural and the affective skills, communication, tolerance, empathy, opening the pupils' minds to the ideas of other cultures, really exploring the notion of Spanish as a global language. We literally don't have time to do that. So so it's quite interesting, I think, to have a discussion about, if Spanish is dropped to year 7 or year 8, how much impact that has on the retention at 6th form. So we've only got 2 responses, so I'm not sure if maybe people haven't got their phones or accessing the menti.com.
Helen, would you like to share your screen, perhaps? Do you have the Menti information on there?
Gosh. Have I not shared it? Bear with me. I'm so sorry. I thought it was shared. Hang on. Sorry. Okay. Bear with me. Sorry. So sorry. I was looking at it and I assumed everybody else was. It's been a long day. Can you all see it now? Sorry. Can you see the screen now? Yeah.
Yes, that's visible, Helen. Thank you.
Great, great. Okay. Okay. Oh, results are hidden. Hang on. Where are the results there? Why are they hidden? Okay, fine. Okay. So quite a lot of you in year 7, which is great. I wish that were the situation with us. Shall I move on? Shall I move on to the next question? Kevin, shall I move on to the next question?
Yes, the links are all there in the chat. So if colleagues do want to go,
great,
it's
there we are.
happening. It's happening. That's much better. Thank you, colleagues, for answering those questions. So how many more questions have you got,
Okay,
Helen?
just a few. Okay, so
okay,
how
wonderful.
many entries for IGCSE Spanish do you have this year? Just getting a sort of, straw poll of how Spanish is doing. Okay, yeah. In my school, we have 60. Oh, 96. Great. Amazing. Okay, 60. Yeah. Okay. Super. ET3. Right. Okay. Kevin, prompt me to move on. I don't want to wait too long to delay people.
I think that looks like about the number of colleagues that are responding. So unless anybody puts in the chat that they want to have the questions on the screen for longer, unless anyone does that, then we will move on, Helen. Okay.
Now, this is the key one. This is the one that really interests me, because this is reported from Eton Group to be the nosedive that we've experienced. So, I think it would be really interesting to know from colleagues, has there been a dip? Is there a tangible dip in the number of potential year 12 pupils? That's pretty important, which maybe we can flag up a bit later on, or put in the chat, or or have some questions at the end. Okay, so let's have. Oh, okay, all right. Let's have a look at the next one. Okay, all right. So how many pupils do you currently have in year 12 for Spanish? Right. Okay, so currently in year 12, because I think as the photograph indicates, they were the year that was the first set of CAGs. So this is all very interesting. Less than 5, yeah. More than 20, fantastic, yeah. Less than 10, yeah. And if this, I think we need to all reflect, as I'm sure you realise, on is there a palpable change, and what do we think the potential causes might be? Okay, and then we've got the A-level numbers for September, which I think we've covered, haven't we, more or less? So that's something where I think we need to galvanise ourselves, really, and see where we are. Less than 15, less than 10, less than 5. Yeah. Okay. So less than 15, in the past, I remember we might have had 3 or 4 groups for Spanish A-level, and now it's you really could get them in 1, which is obviously a big disappointment. Okay, now this is another thing, which is another question which is really linked into the workshops, because the workshops that Robin's mentioned, which are the next phase of the UCL research, are to do with facilitating A-level teachers to becoming very confident, because this is what I was mentioning, that in the past, it was a given that undergraduate linguists from British universities would be confident in the delivery of literature. But now there's been a shift. So these workshops, the intention, excited. Oh, I like that. Excited, very nice. That's super. Yes, but how confident are you? Do we need? How much do we need to help younger colleagues? The colleagues who are just coming into the profession, who feel a little bit uncertain about how they might do this, because they're not the sort of the previous experienced colleagues who had a lot of experience of canonical Spanish texts, had a great breadth of knowledge. So I think that there's also the shift that we need to have a look at as regards potentially involving colleagues from ISMLA in those workshops, and in really, you know, putting together resources and the sharing of materials and training in order to encourage retention and recruitment at A level. Okay. Right, now, do you undertake cross-curricular collaboration, and if so, which subjects? So you might want to write not very often, once a year, once a term, not at all, or with which subjects. You have done it in the past, or is it a regular thing? Those are the sort of responses here, if that's possible. Not very often, yeah, not very often. I think not very often is because of timetable. Yeah, not really, sadly. Absolutely. I mean, I often feel that if we had lots of time, you know, I'm sure we all have absolutely wonderful ideas, but it's just a question if you've got to teach the preterite, you've got to get those irregular preterites across, or you've got to teach these topics and you literally don't have time. Yes, we enjoy collaboration, but not very often. Yeah, and I think it's never, yeah. And I think it's my instinct is that the sea change needs to come in this. I think my view is, in the first instance, the sea change of curriculum development with modern languages comes with this, and comes with the freeing up of time for us to really promote languages through transactional activities. So, for example, what's to stop football training in German? If you have a German teacher who also plays football, who does games on a regular basis, what's to stop them just switching to make that transactional and natural? So lots of ideas there. Obviously, some very obvious ideas such as Italian and history of art. Those would be two disciplines that go together very well. For example, the other day I taught my year 9s because I knew they were doing the Cold War, and they were doing the Cuban Revolution. I just did a sort of standalone lesson because it was the summer term about Che Guevara, Fidel Castro, Bay of Pigs, with headlines from newspapers in Spanish. So it's quite easy to put together and to do, but I think to do it in a sustained way is the issue that we've got, because we can all do this, you know, as standalone lessons in the summer term, but I think it's a sense of getting it embedded into the curriculum on a very regular basis, you know, and obviously that also involves the goodwill and the giving up of time within the timetable from our colleagues in our other disciplines and other subjects. Yeah, I mean, that would be such an easy one. The football and the German, somebody suggested it to me. I think it's a great combination, and it would mean that the kids would pick things up very naturally. And I think there's lots and lots of potential here, but again, it's to do with our senior management. It's to do with the embracing of modern languages as an essential part of the curriculum, higher than us to a certain degree. Okay, so these are just some basic ideas that I came up with, and then we've probably got time for some questions then. So really, just looking at Spanish, what could we look at? We could look at the Cold War, like I just said. So, I mean, these are some images that I used in my year 9 lesson. You know, just switching their knowledge, just showing to them that actually knowledge is transferable. Knowledge is transferable across languages. You know, it's transactional. They can understand the Bay of Pigs in Spanish in the same way that they can understand it when it's delivered in English, you know, and I think it just opens up a whole different perspective to them. So that's one example that I think could be done quite easily. What else did I put? I can't recall. Yeah, and multimedia, as I said, you know, I think that we can learn from our colleagues in higher education. We can look at multimedia, we can look at art, we can look at films. We can look at short excerpts of literature as well. So for example, here we've got Ribera, we've got La Victoria Gloriosa, we've got Goya's Los Desastres de la Guerra, we've got Picasso's Guernica, all sorts of things to look at war. So these burbujas culturales could also be clustered across a term. So you might say, well, we're going to look at war, we're going to look at whatever you like, whatever ties in with maybe a broader school curriculum as well. Then we've got dictatorship. So if we're thinking about making connections, I found really over the past couple of years, and I don't know if this is the experience of colleagues, but A-level economics and politics have skyrocketed, and which is very interesting to me because they have no knowledge of economics and politics prior to choosing it for year 12. So, I think it's always really interesting to drill down into, I wonder why that is happening. That's an interesting development. So I think that, we can capitalize on the success of other departments, like I said, with STEM. I actually, a colleague of mine, I must mention this, I don't think I said it earlier. A colleague of mine actually suggested today that she'd really like, she's the head of German at UCS, said that she'd really like to run a trip with the mathematics department to the BMW factory in Germany at some point, hopefully next year when trips recommence. And just, you can have the maths pupils from a STEM perspective and an engineering perspective, and then the German pupils. And then the idea of they all do a lesson in German. So just to show them these different applications. And the same here. Why not, if you're talking about dictatorship and democracy in politics, what better than an exploration of Latin America? So here you've got some films, you've got the classic Raza, about of franquismo. You've got El secreto de sus ojos, about la guerra sucia en Argentina. Chile, again, La historia oficial. So lots and lots of potential that I think that we can be making those cross-curricular links. Immigration, you've got Black Lives Matter. You've got Everybody's Invited, where you might start to look at gender, agency, gender politics. Here you've got immigration, a huge range of films available in the Spanish language as regards immigration. This is the first one, which has been sort of cropped, I'm afraid, is Flores de Otro Mundo, semi-comedic, Spanish films. And then you've got, of course, Sin Nombre, always very popular with the pupils. And this is one that I'm sort of developing at present, which is really about Venezuela. So there's a fabulous novel, which is by a young Venezuelan female writer called Karina Sainz Borgo, and it's called La hija de la española, but in English, the title is translated into It Would Be Night in Caracas, which is the last line of the novel in Spanish. And lots of things going on about Venezuela being a failed state, some fabulous documentaries on BBC Mundo, one particular called La Torre David, which is the largest vertical slum in Latin America. They've been evicted from there now, but a really, really interesting insight, into geopolitics, into immigration, all sorts of things. And I think if we, as Robin said, and Robin I think is very keen on this, is to lift things out of the textbook, get everything out of the textbook and make it as contemporary and as current as possible. And I think that's one way of really drawing the pupils in. So again, we've got gender, race and agency, huge potential with Spanish and Latin American film. Roma is a film that hugely springs to mind there. How much agency does the central female character have? Well, the answer is not very much, really. Notions of the patriarchal voice, notions of lack of agency, memory, his memory as a white upper middle class man growing up in Mexico, and the sort of the lack of connection or lack of understanding of what really was happening with the indigenous working class. All of those things can be brought out into a really, really vibrant debate in the Spanish classroom. And then one last thing, and then I'm just looking at the clock. you know, develop your websites. You know, I mean, Google Sites is a fantastic platform, which is super intuitive and easy to upload things. So, you know, UCS Modern Languages, you can see here on the screen, you know, have a section on careers in languages, promote that to the pupils. So this is just obviously a screenshot from that. You know, have a list of, you know, of undergraduate modules, engineering and German, chemistry and French. You know, every medical school in the United Kingdom has the option for undergraduates to undertake work experience in a foreign country. So, you know, lots of potential there. Médecins Sans Frontières, talking about languages, as I said before, as a bolt-on skill. And I won't go into this because this will take too long, but, you know, the idea of skills, you know, I think we need to be also translating, not just, you know, not just talking about the idea of languages as learning verbs and learning vocabulary and doing Quizlet, but actually talking to pupils really quite low down the school, you know, start them in year 7 and year 8, talking about transferable skills, getting them to understand the ideas of, you know, what learning a language gives them in this high level. You know, I think they're up to it. They will understand it. You know, and I think the sooner that we start that, the better. So that was it, really, Kevin. I think I'm done. So so any questions that anybody might have, and you can see here that you please follow us on Twitter. You've got the Twitter addresses up there as well. And are there any questions that anybody has for Robin or for myself?
Thank you so much, Helen and Robin, for that fantastic presentation, rallying cry, and, you know, practical tips all sort of thrown in. I think it's great that we've sort of heard from you both, because I know lots of our colleagues and members really appreciate the bulletin that you put together, and thank you very much for the invitation to invite our pupils to contribute. That sounds like a good project for the summer holidays to send them off with, and for giving us lots of food for thought there, as well as some really great ideas for us to take away, not just for Spanish, as you say, but for all the different languages. So thank you very much. Yes.